It started on a Wednesday, not one marked by tragedy or storm clouds, but one that looked like any other, soft sun cutting through morning fog, leaves collecting in the gutters like pieces of an unfinished puzzle. In the small town of Kingston, New York, the seasons were always gentle with their arrivals. Late October had that kind of hush that made it easier to ignore the past, easier to pretend that everything had moved on. But memories don't really go away in towns like Kingston. They just sink into the concrete. 3 decades had passed since the disappearance. It had been a field trip, a simple one, planned for months. 23 sixth graders and 1 teacher boarding a bus bound for Bear Hollow Wildlife Preserve, 1 hour and 27 minutes away, down a 2-lane road lined with birch and pine. There was no rain that day, no mechanical failure, no record of a detour, no distress call, no remains. The bus and every soul on board vanished without a sound, without a skid mark, without a single broken branch to suggest anything at all had gone wrong. Kingston responded the way small towns often do when shaken, quietly. There were search parties and posters, candlelight vigils and press conferences, but over time the echoes faded. The school was repainted. The town held fundraisers. Names were carved into plaques, then plaques into questions were buried under polite silences, and theories were passed around like old coins, handled too often, edges worn smooth. Some said it was an abduction, others blamed the wilderness, a few insisted it was a government cover-up, but nothing stuck. And when nothing sticks, people stop asking. Then, 30 years later, someone knocked on a door. It was early, too early for visitors, and Joanne Harper wasn't expecting anyone. The kettle had just started to whistle when she heard it, a short knock, 2 taps, and a pause. She thought maybe it was her neighbor again, the one with the lost cat. She pulled on her robe, tied it once, and opened the door with the casual tiredness of a woman in her 60s, who had long stopped fearing bad news. There he stood, mud-splattered shoes, hair too long, eyes too. He couldn't have been more than 12. In his hand, he held a dented red lunchbox, the metal kind that hadn't been made in years, its latch rusted, stickers faded into dull ghosts of cartoons that used to mean something. He looked like he had come from another time, and he had. He didn't say hello. He didn't even ask where he was. He looked past her shoulder into the house and said, "Is this still the school?" Joanne's throat closed. For a full 5 seconds she said nothing. Her eyes dropped to the lunchbox. There, written in fading permanent marker, was a name she knew too well. Daniel Mercer. She had memorized those names. Every teacher in Kingston had. The 23 children from Mrs. Dunnas. All gone, all presumed dead. All their photos had hung in the school foyer for 15 years, until a renovation forced the district to take them down. She remembered Daniel's face, round cheeks, big ears. A small scar on his chin from a fall on the playground. It had been etched into the corner of her memory, preserved like a flower pressed between pages. And now, here he was, standing on her porch, 3 decades late, not a day older. "I got lost," he said, as if explaining a tardy slip. "I was looking for the bus." He held up the lunchbox like might help explain. She took it from him instinctively, still staring at him as if he were made of glass. Inside was a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, nearly fossilized. A small photo, a class picture, bent at the corners, and tucked into the lining, folded once, was a note. A single line in uneven blue ink. "Do not trust the driver." The police were called, then the hospital, then the state. DNA matched. Dental records confirmed. It was him. It was Daniel Mercer. The problem wasn't proving who he was. The problem was explaining how. He had no memory of anything after boarding the bus. No memory of the preserve, of the teacher, of his classmates. He didn't even seem to understand why people were acting strange around him. When asked what year it was, he hesitated, then guessed wrong. When asked where he'd been, he said. "In the woods, I think." He blinked a lot, winced at loud sounds, flinched at car horns. He didn't recognize his own reflection at first. The town, meanwhile, froze. Some residents welcomed the story like a long-lost limb rushing to the hospital with cards and balloons and casseroles. Others locked their doors, unsure what to make of it. Grief makes people cautious. So does guilt. People who had once organized searches now changed the channel when the news came on. People who had buried their own silence now had to dig it up. And people who thought the past had drowned were forced to admit they'd only boarded it up, like an abandoned house. Daniel was placed under observation. He was given clean clothes, warm meals, and a counselor with a soft voice and He didn't ask many questions, but he repeated one sentence more than once. "I was supposed to see her." He said it like a mantra, like a broken record that kept skipping on the... The field trip was scheduled for Bear Hollow, a small wildlife preserve about 70 miles from Kingston. It had closed down in the early 2000s due to budget cuts and a lack of visitors. The main road in had crumbled, the trails had overgrown. The visitor center had collapsed during a storm 5 years prior. But last week, a park ranger named Anita Torres had reported something strange. She'd found fresh tire marks in the mud, not from a car, from a bus. She was sure of it. And near the lake's edge, she found rope, frayed, damp, buried partially under moss and leaves. She hadn't reported it right away. Not until she saw Daniel's face on the news. The investigators returned to the site, combed it with the dogs, drones, and ground-penetrating radar. They found nothing, no vehicle, no bones, no evidence. But someone had been there, recently. Someone had stood on that shoreline, stared out at the black water, and walked away again. In the meantime, an old yearbook resurfaced, Hollow Creek Elementary, 1995. Page 67, the 6th grade class photo. Daniel was in it, third from the left, with a crooked smile and his arm around another boy named Mikey Delgado. They were all smiling, except one. A girl in the back row, red hair, arms folded, expression unreadable. Her name wasn't in the caption. She wasn't listed in any school records. But there she was. No one could explain it. More confusing still, that same yearbook page in the original printed copies was blank. The library's archive showed page 67 as empty, a misprint they'd always assumed. But the photo that surfaced online wasn't scanned from that version. It had been taken with a phone recently. Someone still had a copy. Someone had held on to a photo that no one else remembered existing. The rumors started again. Some said Daniel had been hidden all these years, taken by someone, raised off the grid. Others said he'd been found before, but kept quiet. One woman swore he'd come into her diner 2 years ago and ordered pancakes without speaking a word. A retired teacher claimed to have seen him in the background of a photograph taken at Niagara Falls. All of it speculation, none of it proof. But something changed in Daniel. On the 6th night, he had a nightmare. He screamed so loudly that nurses from the floor below ran upstairs. He curled into himself, crying, repeating the same word over and over. Whistling, whistling, whistling. They asked him what the sound was. He couldn't describe it, just that it was a song, one his dad used to play in the car, one that the bus driver had whistled the morning they vanished. The detail chilled the room. Daniel's father had died in 2001, but he had been interviewed many times in the years following the disappearance. In one of those interviews, he had mentioned playing a specific track, an old 70s folk tune, every morning on the drive to school. It wasn't a popular song, not one likely to be remembered by anyone else. When investigators returned to the red lunchbox for further analysis, they made a discovery. Beneath the sandwich, under the photo, hidden in the lining that had started to tear from age, was another note, this one written in block letters, neater, older, different pen. It read, "There was never supposed to be a Daniel Mercer." The handwriting didn't match Daniel's. It didn't match the teacher's. It didn't match anyone in the family. But the ink was dated. Old, consistent with the type used in school offices during the early 90s. Joanne Harper sat in her living room that night, lights off, a single mug of tea untouched on the coffee table. She played a VHS tape from 1994, the 6th grade holiday assembly. Her hand trembled as she paused the screen. Daniel was there, seated front row, tapping his foot. But something was wrong. She rewound the tape, played it again. Slower this time. The boy sitting next to Daniel, the one in the plaid shirt, flickered once, just for a frame, a half-second blur, like a skipped beat. And then he was gone. Joanne didn't sleep that night. The next morning she found a package on her porch, no return address. Inside was a roll of film, undeveloped, and a key. She didn't know yet that the key opened a locker at the Kingston Public Library, one that hadn't been opened in 28 years. She didn't know that inside the locker was a tape recorder, an envelope, and a single cassette labeled only, "Play if he ever comes back." Because by then more children had started to come forward, not all from Kingston, not all with names the town remembered, but all with one thing in common. They had once been on that bus, and they all remembered the same song. He had never liked hospitals, even before all this, before the strangers and the lights and the questions. Something about the smell had always made his stomach tighten. Antiseptic, mixed with warm plastic, and something artificial. The hallways felt too white, the blankets too stiff. He wasn't allowed to close the door to his room. They said it was for safety. Daniel didn't argue. He barely spoke unless asked. He sat by the window most mornings, legs pulled to his chest, watching the parking lot below. He counted the cars, tried to guess where people were going. A silver hatchback that always left early, maybe a nurse's. A red minivan with flower stickers, probably someone visiting. But he never saw anyone arrive for him. No one brought balloons or cried in the hallway, no cameras, no flowers, just professionals with badges and notebooks, a parade of quiet voices. They told him his parents were gone. His mother had passed away in 2004, his father in 2001. There were no siblings, no grandparents left. An uncle in Arizona, long estranged. The counselor said it gently, with long pauses and kind eyes. Daniel listened without blinking. Then he nodded. Once, that was it. He didn't cry. He didn't ask to see photos or graves or what happened to the house on Linden Avenue. They showed him a picture once, a family photo from 1994, taken in front of their old Ford Taurus. His father had a mustache. His mother wore a denim jacket with sunflowers on the shoulders. Daniel was in the middle, arms crossed, a gap where his front teeth should be. He stared at it for a long time, tracing the faces with his finger. "I remember the sun," he said. "It was behind the camera. That's why we're squinting." It was the first memory he had volunteered. They called that progress. The woman assigned to him was named Margaret. She was a therapist, maybe late 40s, with short hair and thick-framed glasses. She never pressed too hard, never smiled too much. She treated Daniel not like a curiosity or a victim, but like someone in the middle of something too large to name. He liked that. She met with him every afternoon after lunch, always with the same introduction. "Good to see you again, Daniel. Want to sit by the window or the table today?" He always chose the window. One day she asked him to draw something from the field trip. Anything. He stared at the blank paper for several minutes before sketching a square with rounded edges. "It was the bus," he explained. "I sat third row back, right side." He drew another shape. This was Mikey. He had gum and wouldn't share. Then he added a tall, thin figure at the front. The driver. When asked why he hadn't drawn one, Daniel said, "I don't think he had one." Margaret didn't react. She nodded, took the drawing, and asked what the driver was wearing. "Blue shirt," he said. "Name tag. It said Walt, or maybe Walter. But the W was smudged. That detail sent a ripple through the investigation team. Walt Kincaid had been a substitute driver that day, hired last minute, no criminal record, no known connection to the school. But his personnel file had vanished from district archives 2 years after the disappearance. Never found. Daniel didn't recognize any photos of him. Said the man he remembered was tall and wore sunglasses even inside. That he whistled when he thought no one was listening. That he kept looking in the rearview mirror, not at the road. He kept watching us, Daniel, like he didn't know what we were. Margaret steered the conversation gently away. She asked about school. What Daniel remembered. He spoke slowly, like pulling words through syrup. He remembered gym class, the rope climb. Failing the spelling test on embarrassment. He remembered the girl with the red hair who sat by the window. He didn't remember her name. Only that she had freckles on her knees and always peeled her orange slices too early at lunch. And he remembered Mrs. Dunning. She wore long skirts and always smelled like lavender. She had a soft voice, except when the room got too loud. Then her tone would sharpen, not mean, just precise. He remembered her laugh, but most of all he remembered the way she held the clipboard during roll call, tucked under one arm, pen poised like nothing could ever go wrong if the names were read out loud in the right order. They brought in old staff photos. Daniel pointed her out immediately. That's her, Mrs. D. The officials nodded. They didn't tell him her body was never found. That her apartment was left untouched for weeks after the disappearance. That the police had found a letter addressed to no one with a single sentence inside. I should have stopped him. They didn't show that to Daniel. They didn't show him the second note either. The one found under his lunchbox, sealed inside the lining. The one that questioned whether he had ever existed at all. The investigation team wasn't sure what to make of it. They had tested the handwriting. No match. They had searched school records, nothing unusual, but someone had gone through great lengths to bury any trace of him from the system. Medical records, dental, school reports. His name had been removed or altered in dozens of places. It wasn't deletion, it was quiet erasure, almost like someone had tried to unmake him. But Margaret didn't mention any of that. She focused on the now, on helping Daniel anchor to something real. She gave him photos to look at, asked him to describe textures, smells, sounds. He said he liked the feel of wood shavings, the smell of rain on hot pavement, the sound of chalk on a blackboard. Little things that didn't belong to any trauma, just to being a boy once. He asked once if he could go home. They told him the house had been sold, renovated, the street renamed. He didn't ask again. A week passed, then another. He began walking the halls more often, peeking into other rooms, watching nurses work. He asked Margaret if he had ever liked science. She said probably. He smiled at that. I think I liked frogs, he said. We dissected one once. It was gross. She laughed, surprised. You remember that? He nodded. Someone screamed. I think it was Mikey. He was remembering. Fragments, images, feelings. One night, a storm rolled in, the kind that rattles windows and makes hospitals feel like spaceships floating in dark water. Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat up, legs dangling from the bed, staring at the rain against the glass. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, he thought he saw a bus parked across the street. He ran to the window. It was gone. The next day, Margaret found him unusually quiet. She asked what he had seen. Nothing, he said. But later, when she offered him a new notebook to write things down, he drew the bus again. This time, it was surrounded by trees. No road, no driver. Just a dozen windows and something dark pressed against the inside of the glass. Margaret didn't ask what it was. She just handed him a pencil and asked if he wanted to keep drawing. He didn't. He closed the notebook and set it aside. A few days later, a man visited, a federal agent. Clean suit, gray tie, eyes like pebbles. He asked Daniel if he remembered any sounds from the day of the trip. Daniel nodded. Birds, wind, the radio. What was on the radio? Daniel didn't hesitate. My dad's song. He hummed a few notes. The agent blinked. That's not a popular song. How do you know it? Because the driver was whistling it. That's how I knew something was wrong. The agent left shortly after, never returned. Daniel didn't notice. He had started carving small shapes into the paper tray beside his bed, little grooves with a spoon. He said it made the room feel more like school. One morning, Margaret asked what scared him. He didn't answer at first, then softly, "When people look at me like I'm not supposed to be here." "Do you feel like you're not?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe I was supposed to stay gone." She didn't speak, just waited. He looked at her, eyes wide but tired. What if the others are still out there? That was the first time he used the word others. The day after, he was moved to a different facility, better security, less media attention. Margaret wasn't told in advance. When she showed up for her afternoon session, his room was empty. He had left behind only one thing, the drawing of the bus with something dark inside. Folded into the corner of the page was a note written in Daniel's handwriting. It read, "I think the girl with red hair is still waiting." He didn't remember the noise at first. It came back in flashes, not a sound exactly, more like a pulse, low and constant, like standing next to something electrical, but never seeing the source. It had no pitch, no rhythm, just pressure, like being underwater, like something humming behind a wall. The more they asked about the bus, the clearer it became, not the road, not the trees. Just that sound, beneath everything, beneath the laughter, the teacher's voice, the humming of tires. It was there, waiting. 2 weeks after Daniel's transfer to the new facility, the first package arrived at the police station. No return address, no note. Just a padded envelope containing a cassette tape and an undeveloped roll of 35mm film. The label on the tape was smudged, but one word was legible, hollow. The film was sent to the lab. The tape was played that same night in a small evidence room by Detective Leah Whitmore, one of the few still working who had been on the original search team in '95. The recording began with static, then wind. Then, very faintly, the sound of a child laughing. Then a voice, soft, female, shaking, or said, "We should have turned back." The full tape lasted 14 minutes and 12 seconds, but only the first 90 seconds contained sound. The rest was blank. The voice did not match any parents or staff previously interviewed. The laugh was indistinct, filtered through background noise, but something about it tightened Whitmore's chest. She had heard that kind of laugh before, small, strained, like trying to sound okay when you're not. The roll of film came back the next day. Most of the shots were overexposed, but one frame was clear. It showed a group of children, mid-step, on a dirt path. Trees all around, blurred edges. At the back of the group was a boy with a red lunchbox. His face was turned toward the camera. It was Daniel. The timestamp on the film's edge read, October 18th, 1995. Daniel had never been photographed during the trip. No one had. There was no official record of them ever arriving at Bear Hollow. And yet here he was, captured on film, surrounded by children no one could identify. Faces that didn't match any of the original 23 students. The photo was shown to Daniel 3 days later. He stared at it without blinking. "They're not the ones," he said. "Not the ones what?" Margaret asked. He didn't answer. At the facility, things began to change. Small things at first. Lights flickered more often. Hallway speakers emitted faint static at random intervals. A nurse swore she saw Daniel in the cafeteria at 3 a.m., sitting alone, even though his room security log showed he hadn't left. One night, a janitor found a small object on the ground floor under the vending machine. It was a name tag, plastic, yellowed, cracked. It read, Walt. The lettering was faded, but unmistakable. Security footage showed nothing. No one had dropped it. No one had touched the vending machine in over a week. Margaret began to document everything. Not just Daniel's sessions, but the little things: flickering lights, misplaced items, time discrepancies in door logs. She kept a notebook in her bag and updated it quietly during meetings, during bathroom breaks, even in the elevator when no one was around. Daniel grew quieter, not scared, just quieter. When asked about the photo again, he said the boy in the picture wasn't him. "It looks like me," he whispered, "but it isn't." The statement didn't make sense until they realized something chilling. The boy in the photo was holding the lunchbox in his left hand. Daniel was right-handed. In every photo, every school record, every memory his teachers could recall, Daniel Mercer had always been right-handed. But the boy in the film roll held it differently, like it belonged to the other hand. Not awkwardly, naturally. They rechecked the original image. The parting of the hair was reversed. The timestamp was on the wrong side. The image wasn't developed backwards, it was flipped, intentionally. Someone had mirrored the frame. They didn't tell Daniel that. He had started drawing again, not every day and never voluntarily, but when given paper he would sometimes sketch small shapes: a window with trees beyond it, a clock without hands, a single shoe on a dirt path. Once he drew a swing set, empty. One of the swings had something tangled around the chains. At first, Margaret thought it was rope, but when she asked, he said, "No, that's her sweater." "Whose sweater?" She fell. His voice had changed. It wasn't the tone, it was the certainty. He wasn't remembering anymore. He was reporting. That week, a construction crew clearing an old service road near Bear Hollow found something buried just beneath the surface. A rusted piece of metal, bent, scratched. When they pulled it out, it was identified as part of a bus door, specifically the interior lever mechanism. The serial number matched the district's old bus inventory. It belonged to bus 926, the bus Daniel had taken, but no other parts were found. Not the frame, not the engine, not a single window, just that lever. It was almost as if the rest had been carried away. Margaret noticed a change in Daniel's posture after that. He stopped looking out the window. He stopped asking where he was. He began to sleep with his shoes on. When asked why, he said, "In case I have to run." From what? He didn't say. One morning, Margaret arrived early. She found Daniel already awake, sitting in the hallway outside his room, arms wrapped around his knees. "I had a dream," he said, before she could speak. "Do you want to tell me about it?" He nodded. "I was back on the bus. But no one else was there, no driver, no kids, just me. And it was moving. Fast. Faster than it should have been. The trees outside were wrong. They didn't move the right way. And the windows started to fog, one by one, like the air was changing." Margaret knelt beside him. "What did you do?" "I tried to open the door, but the handle was missing. Just wires." Then someone whispered something from the back. He paused. "I turned around, and all the seats were gone." What did the voice say? Daniel looked at her then, more alert than usual. It said, "You were never meant to come back." She placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "But you did." He shook his head. "I think that was the mistake." 3 days later, another child surfaced, a girl, 13, found wandering the edge of a rest stop 2 states over. No ID, no shoes. When asked her name, she said Emily. When asked where she came from, she pointed to a tree and said, "That way." Her fingerprints were run through the system. Nothing. But something was familiar. Her drawing, done in crayon on the back of a police form, showed a school bus with no wheels, half buried in leaves. Behind it, trees twisted into a spiral. At the center of the spiral was a lunchbox. Red. Square. Dent in the corner. Daniel was shown the drawing. He stared at it for nearly a minute before whispering, "That's where we went." "Where is that, Daniel?" He didn't answer. He just got up, walked to the window, and said, It's where they stayed. That night, the window in his room cracked from the outside, but the crack ran diagonally, splitting the reflection of Daniel's face in two. The folder was thicker than it should have been. Years of paper stacked on paper, most of it faded, half of it redacted. Detective Leah Whitmore laid the file flat across her desk and ran her hand over the cover like she was trying to feel the weight of everything that had been missed. There were photos inside she hadn't seen in decades, copies of flyers, maps scribbled on, lists of names long since etched into granite. She hadn't opened this folder since her last official day on the case. Now it felt like it had been waiting for her. The sight of Daniel Mercer alive had shaken her. Not just because he was supposed to be dead, they had all been supposed to be, but because he looked like time hadn't touched him. Not in the way it should have. It didn't make sense. No malnutrition could erase 30 years of aging. No trauma could hide decades in a child's bones. And yet there he was, in a hospital gown and sneakers 3 sizes too big, sketching things no boy should be able to remember. The other girl, Emily, wasn't faring better. She didn't answer most questions, didn't know her last name, only sometimes whispered the name Rachel, followed by the phrase, "Don't let her call roll again." That line chilled Leah to the core. Because Rachel was the name of a substitute teacher who'd worked at Hollow Creek the week before the disappearance. A young woman, bright, kind, freshly certified. She'd been assigned to Mrs. Dunning's class briefly before the trip, but she had called out sick the day they left and never returned to the district. Her file had been closed. Until now. They pulled her employment form from storage. The emergency contact listed was a sister in Vermont. They called. The number was disconnected. The address abandoned. Then someone found a yearbook from 1992. Rachel Monroe, senior photo, drama club, stage manager. In the margins of the page, scrawled in pencil, a classmate's note, were the words, "She always stares too long, like she's memorizing you." No one could locate her now. She had vanished sometime after 1996. No credit history, no driver's license renewals. Just silence. And now her name was showing up in the broken memories of a girl who shouldn't know it. Margaret was called in to observe Emily. She brought Daniel's drawings, asking gently if any of them meant something to the girl. Emily pointed to one, a tree split at the trunk, with something hanging from a branch. She said that's where she buried it. Buried what? The list. Margaret asked more, but Emily clammed up. The next day, she refused to speak at all. That night, Margaret reviewed Daniel's tape sessions. One of them, 3 days before Emily's arrival, showed him drawing a tree almost identical to the one Emily had recognized. The same fork in the trunk. The same missing limb on the left side. He had drawn a small shape near the roots, a square with a cross through it. "What's this?" she had asked. "That's where the names go," he had answered. No one had told Emily. No one had shared Daniel's drawings with her before that day. Leah decided to return to the site near Bear Hollow. The land was overgrown. The trail markers had eroded into nothing. But with a few old maps and some guessing, she found a clearing where the shape of the trees matched the drawing. She brought a shovel. 6 inches down, she struck metal. It was a tin box, blue, hinged, rusted along the corners. Inside were 6 folded index cards. Each one had a name. 3 were legible. The others were too faded. One of the names was Daniel Mercer. Another was Rachel Monroe. The last was Margaret Ellis. Margaret didn't understand at first. She had never been to Bear Hollow, never even visited the preserve. She hadn't even lived in the state during the original disappearance. But there was her name, in shaky handwriting, written decades ago. She handed the card to Leah, hand trembling. "That's not my writing." "No, but it's your name." They didn't know what to do with that. There were no fingerprints on the box, no DNA, just the names. Just the feeling that someone had known long before it was going to happen. The next day, Daniel asked for a different room. "This one feels wrong," he said. "It's too loud at night." They checked the security audio, static at 3:17 a.m. A sound like a door creaking open, followed by a faint rhythm. Not footsteps, not a machine. A whistle, the same tune from the tape. When played for Daniel, he covered his ears. "Turn it off. That's his song." "Whose?" "The one who drove us." He sang it to keep us quiet. The FBI wanted to interview him again. Margaret declined. She said he needed time, space, silence. But silence was becoming a rare thing. That week, 3 different residents in Kingston reported seeing an old yellow school bus parked behind the closed library at dawn. Each said it disappeared before they could get close. Each described the same details: a cracked windshield, one headlight out, and the numbers 76 painted in chipped black across the side. The library had been shut down since 2015. No cameras, no traffic. But the janitor reported finding tire tracks in the gravel and something else. An old clipboard, wooden, metal clip broken, no papers attached. Just the initials R.D. scratched into the back. Mrs. Dunning. Leah brought it to Daniel. He stared at it for a full minute, then said, "She used to tap it against her leg when she was mad." "How do you know?" "Because it made a sound like this," he said, and tapped his finger 3 times on the armrest. "That's how we knew she wanted us quiet." Then he frowned. "But the last time she did it, it didn't sound the same." "What do you mean?" "She dropped it, and then she didn't speak again." Margaret watched as his fingers moved unconsciously, repeating the rhythm again and again. The next day, Daniel's drawings changed. They became darker, smudged, less precise. He stopped drawing the bus, started drawing faces, half-finished, eyes erased, mouths stitched. He drew a photo, or what looked like a photo, of the class. But everyone's face was scribbled out except a girl with red hair. The same girl from the yearbook photo. The one not listed. The one no one could identify. When asked, Daniel said, "She stayed. That's why she remembers everything." Margaret leaned forward. "Do you know her name?" He hesitated. "No, but she knows mine." Onis. They brought in facial recognition experts, ran her image through missing persons databases. No matches. It was as if she had never existed, except in fragments, except in the margins, except in the things Daniel drew without knowing why. That night, Daniel spoke to Margaret in a voice she hadn't heard before. Not younger, not older. So just distant. "Do you think memories can get stuck in places?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "Yes, I think sometimes they stay behind when people move on." He looked at the wall, then back at her. Then, memories that got stuck. Before she could respond, the lights in the room dimmed slightly, just for a moment, then came back. Daniel didn't react. "Margaret," he whispered, "what happens if I start remembering the wrong things?" "What do you mean? What if they didn't want me to remember?" He looked her in the eyes. The rain started just after midnight. Not a storm, just steady, persistent drizzle, like the sky couldn't decide whether to cry or whisper. On the far side of the facility, where the staff entrance faced the parking lot, a motion sensor light flickered 3 times, then died. No one noticed. It had done that before. Maintenance was scheduled for the following week. Inside room 213, Daniel Mercer lay still. His eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling, tracking something invisible. His hands were under the blanket, fingers curled, unmoving. The monitor beside his bed beeped in a perfect rhythm. And then, for a moment, it didn't. A single, sharp spike. Then silence. 3 beats. Then the pattern resumed. No nurse saw it happen. The glitch was only visible for 5 seconds. When reviewed later, no one could explain it. They chalked it up to interference. But something about the shape of the spike disturbed the tech reviewing the data. She didn't say anything. Just stared a little longer, then she... At 3:17 a.m., Daniel sat up. He didn't call out. He didn't look around. He just whispered, "It's not mine." The hallway remained empty. The cameras showed nothing. But in the file room 3 floors below, a folder fell from the top shelf without being touched. Its label read, M. Ellis, 1995. Observation notes. It had never been cataloged. By sunrise, no one knew it had been found. By noon, the pages were in Leah Whitmore's hands. The first note was dated October 19, 1995. It described a boy, name redacted, exhibiting signs of time displacement, severe trauma, and what the writer called unreal memories. The notes referred to recurring music, a misaligned list, and the phrase, "She said I wasn't supposed to be here." The signature at the bottom was faint but clear. M. Ellis. Leah closed the folder and just sat for a moment. Everything she knew about Margaret Ellis, calm, methodical, clinical, didn't match what she held in her hands. She drove straight to the facility. Margaret didn't flinch when she saw the. She didn't deny it. She didn't ask where Leah had found it. She just said, "You weren't supposed to see that." Leah didn't blink. "How long have you known?" Margaret looked away. "Since Fairford, 1994. That was the first time." Leah sat down slowly, like the air had thickened. "What happened?" Margaret took a breath as if she'd practiced this before. There was a class, 5th grade, 11 kids. They went missing during a nature walk. No bus involved, just the woods. It took a week before anyone admitted something was wrong. By then, the trail they had taken didn't exist anymore. Literally. Maps showed a different route. Markers were gone. One of the teachers said she remembered a fork in the path. "I walked that path every day for 2 years. There was never a fork." Leah leaned forward. "Did anyone come back?" "One, a boy, Evan. But he wouldn't speak, not at first. When he did, he only said one thing." She paused. Leah waited. He said, "It brought me back because I didn't belong there either." "It?" He never explained. What happened to him? He died a year later, fell through the ice on a frozen lake. But the odd part wasn't that. Leah's voice lowered. "What was it?" Margaret's eyes didn't move. "There was no lake on the property." Leah stood up. "Why the hell didn't you say something when Daniel returned?" Margaret looked exhausted. "Because I didn't know it was the same. I hoped it wasn't. But then he started drawing the tree, the bus, the girl." "What girl?" "The redhead. I saw her too. Once. In Fairford." "You think she's connected?" "I think she never left." A knock on the door cut the conversation short. A nurse, pale and out of breath. "You need to come, now? It's Daniel?" They rushed to his room. He was awake, sitting on the floor, hands flat against the wall, whispering something under his breath. "Names," he said. "She made us say the names." Margaret crouched beside him. "Who?" He didn't answer, just kept pressing his palms against the wall. "There's a list," he said, "but it's not finished." Leah asked, "What happens when it's finished?" He looked up slowly. His face was pale, eyes bloodshot, as if he hadn't blinked in hours. "They stay." "Who stays?" Daniel tilted his head. "The wrong ones." That afternoon, Leah revisited the old bus inventory records. Bus W76, the one used on the day of the field trip, had been sold for parts in 1997. But no salvage yard could confirm receiving it. The transaction was marked off-site disposal with no trace of a vendor. She traced the name of the driver, Walt Kincaid, still missing, no next of kin, no address history past 1995. Just one emergency contact listed in his file, Rachel Monroe. She checked again. Rachel Monroe had never worked for the district, but her name appeared in a staff memo a week before the trip, requesting a substitute for Mrs. Dunning due to illness. Except Mrs. Dunning hadn't called in sick. She'd never missed a day. That memo had been forged. The handwriting matched the same style as the notes Margaret had signed. But it wasn't Margaret's writing, not exactly. It was older, shakier, as if copied from memory. Margaret admitted she had seen similar handwriting before. She showed Leah an old note she kept, unsigned, found in her mailbox in 2002. It read, "You left a door open. Make sure no one else does." She had never known what it meant. Now she thought the door was never physical. It was names, lists, roles. Every time someone said the full list out loud, it counted them. When Mrs. Dunning read the names on the bus, something answered. And every time Daniel whispered those names in his sleep, something listened. That night, Margaret found a drawing on her desk. Not Daniel's, Emily's. A row of children standing in a line, holding hands. At the end of the line, one figure was upside down, head against the dirt, feet in the air, smiling. In her other hand was a list. At the bottom of the drawing was a caption, written in blocky letters. "Only the ones not written can go home." They checked Emily's handwriting sample. She hadn't written it. Daniel hadn't either. The ink was faded, different pen. They tested the paper. The fibers matched those used in elementary schools in the 1990s. The next day, the power flickered across the entire building, 3 minutes of darkness. When the lights returned, every file with Daniel's name had vanished from the hospital. Only one copy remained, printed in Leah's hand. On it, someone had written one more line, red ink, slanted letters. Daniel Mercer was never enrolled. The room was still when Margaret entered. No beeping, no steps, just the quiet hum of machinery in the walls, the kind of sound you didn't notice until it was the only thing left. Daniel was sitting on the edge of the bed, feet touching the floor, eyes fixed on the space between his hands. He didn't look up when she sat by him. He just said, she didn't ask what. It wasn't the silence in the building. It was inside him, the thinning thread of memory, the last pieces holding him together, fraying one by one. The drawings had stopped. The sleepwalking had stopped. Even the questions had stopped. There was only quiet now, not peace, absence. He held something in his hands. She leaned in slowly, not wanting to startle him. It was the laminated photo of the class, the one they had found in the lunchbox. But now something was different. One of the children in the photo, the girl with the red hair, was missing. Not scratched out, not smudged, just gone. The space where she had been was empty, but not blank. The background continued as if she had never stood there to begin with. Margaret whispered, "Daniel." He shook his head. She stayed too long. She remembered too much. She's still there? She is the place. Margaret's chest tightened. You said the names weren't right, that there was another list. He nodded slowly. They made two, one for the trip, one for the return. What happens to the ones not on the second list? Daniel didn't answer. He looked at the photo again. And then, softly, you were on the second list. The floor beneath Margaret seemed to shift. What? You. He pointed to the empty space in the photo. You were supposed to go too. Her hands trembled. I wasn't even there. I never went on the trip. You were near, he said. That's all it takes. If you're near when it opens. The memory hit her like cold water, a moment she had long buried. October 18th, 1995. She had been in Kingston visiting her aunt. She'd walked past the school, paused at the gates, watched the children load onto the bus. She hadn't known them. She hadn't stayed. Just kept walking. But she had been there. She had heard the roll call. The teacher had raised her voice to be heard over the engine, reading names off the clipboard. And now, 30 years later, she could still remember hearing the name Margaret Ellis. She'd thought it was a coincidence, a child with the same name. Now she wasn't sure. She stood up slowly, pacing the room, her breath shallow, her thoughts splintering. Daniel, if I was on that list, why am I here now? He didn't look up. Because something let you go. That night, she didn't go home. She stayed in the observation room reviewing the tapes. At 2:36 a.m., the footage of Daniel's room glitched. For 3 seconds, the image jumped. Not forward, not backward, but sideways. The timestamp flickered. When it stabilized, Daniel was no longer alone. There was a figure seated in the chair by the window, thin, still, unmoving, long red hair covering the face. No one else entered or exited the room. The footage before and after showed nothing unusual. She showed the frame to Leah the next morning. Leah didn't speak for nearly a minute. Then she whispered, "I saw her too, the day the class disappeared." "You never told me that." "I didn't know what I saw. I was 12. I was in the classroom next door. I remember hearing laughter, then silence. I looked through the window. The red-haired girl. She was standing near the bus. Everyone else was already inside. She was staring right at me." Margaret's voice cracked. "What did she do?" "She smiled, then got on the bus." Leah sat down hard, like her knees gave out. "I thought I imagined it, but I never forgot her face." They printed the frame, set it beside the original yearbook photo. Same girl, same hair, same look, different decade. That afternoon, Emily drew again for the first time in a week. A house, no windows, a door with no knob. In front of it, the same red-haired girl. This time, there were lines across her arms, tally marks, 4 at a time, over and over. When asked what they were, Emily whispered, "She keeps count." Of what? Who remembers? Leah drove out to Bear Hollow alone. The path was almost gone now, eaten by weeds and fog. The air was dense, not just with moisture, but with something heavier, like walking into someone else's memory. She reached the clearing, the one with the broken tree, and there it was, half buried, rust-stained, a school bus door lodged in the earth like a tooth. She knelt beside it, brushed off the dirt. 3 letters carved into the paint, DME Daniel Mercer Ellis. It wasn't his full name, but it had been written by someone who thought it was. When she returned to the facility, Margaret was gone. No sign of struggle, no resignation. Just her notebook on the chair open to the last page. A single line in red ink. "I think it was me." Daniel didn't speak for 2 days. Then, quietly, he said, "It's closing." "What is?" Leah asked. "The door." "Where does it go?" He looked at her, then really looked. "It doesn't go anywhere." He placed the photo in her hands. Now 3 children were missing. One by one, they were being erased. And there was no second list anymore. Only the memory of a name never spoken aloud again. Leah sat at the edge of the woods, legs folded beneath her, fingers sunk into the damp soil. It was just after dawn. The light was gray, not quite morning, not quite night. In the distance, the mist curled between the trees like smoke from something that had stopped burning a long time ago. She hadn't slept. She hadn't even meant to drive there. Her car had turned the corner on instinct. Like some part of her still thought maybe, if she walked the trail backward, she could undo it, unfold the past, retrace the breath that had been held for 30 years. Behind her, the town was starting to wake up. Children packing lunches, dogs barking, coffee brewing, as if nothing had ever been missing. As if a classroom full of 6th graders hadn't simply evaporated on a fall morning in 1995 and left behind nothing but questions no one wanted to ask anymore. But the woods remembered. So did she, and so did Daniel. He had spoken just once since Margaret's disappearance. A single sentence before he closed his eyes and turned toward the window again. She traded her name for mine. It didn't make sense, not completely, but Leah understood enough. Margaret had been close enough to the list, maybe part of it, maybe a shadow written in the margin, and somehow that name had been taken, borrowed, misfiled, and when the weight became too much, she gave it back. Daniel hadn't drawn since. The photograph of the class remained on his nightstand unchanged for days. Then, the night before, Leah found it flipped over. On the back, written in pencil, one last name had been added. It was hers, Leah Whitmore. And below it, one more word, exempt. She wasn't sure who had written it. Daniel denied it. The staff hadn't touched it. But something about the way it was written, firm, small, deliberate, told her everything she needed to know. She had been close once, so close. But the door had never opened for her, and now it wouldn't again. The file room had been cleaned out. Half the records missing, no signs of forced entry, no footage on the cameras. But one clipboard remained behind, laid neatly on the table with the metal clip bent upward, like someone had tried to erase their own signature and couldn't. The last page on the clipboard was a list of names. It ended on line 24. Daniel Mercer was line 23. Line 24 was blank, but written faintly in the top corner was a set of initials, R.M. Rachel Monroe. They never found her. Or maybe they did and never knew it. Leah had gone to the library that afternoon, not to search records, just to sit, to let the stillness wrap around her like a soundproof blanket. She found herself in the children's section, the same row she remembered visiting on a school trip once, 4th grade. Someone had read them a story about a boy who got lost and turned into a tree. She'd laughed back then, said it was dumb. Now she wasn't so sure. A child passed by her, red hair, freckles, quiet feet, and for one brief second, Leah's heart stopped. But the girl smiled, waved, and walked on. Not her. Not this time. She went back to the hospital that evening. Daniel was asleep, peaceful, almost too still. The photo was no longer on the table. Instead, there was a lunchbox. Not old, new, shiny red with a clean latch. Inside it, a peanut butter sandwich, an apple, and a folded note. The note read, "Some things need to be remembered." No signature. She didn't cry, not then, not until later. When she returned to her car, she noticed the passenger door was slightly ajar. Inside was a clipboard. The same clipboard, same initials, same names. But now the list had a title, Field Trip Manifest, October 18, 1995. At the bottom of the page, a final note had been written in fresh ink. It read, "This time, we brought the right ones back." She left the clipboard there, didn't take it to the station, didn't report it. She drove home with the windows down, air cool against her skin. When she got home, she poured a glass of water, sat on the floor, and stared at the photo of her 5th grade class still taped to the fridge. One by one, she traced their faces. Most of them were gone now. Some had moved, some had changed their names. Some had become quiet versions of themselves. But she remembered everyone. She remembered the sound of their names she remembered the teachers. She remembered Daniel, just barely, sitting behind her, always tapping his pencil to a beat no one else could hear. She remembered everything. And maybe that was the point. Maybe it was never about disappearance. Maybe it was about memory. Who remembers? Who forgets? Who stays behind so others can move on? And maybe some names are never meant to be read out loud. The next morning she returned to the woods. She found the clearing, the tree, the space where something had once been. She didn't bring anything with her, just one. And as the sun began to rise over Kingston, cutting through the mist like a slow unraveling, she whispered it once. Then, never again. And somewhere, far beneath the earth, or beyond the reach of maps and logic and sound, something quiet, closed, just like that Wednesday morning so long ago, the kind that looked innocent.